Now tonight's installment of our look at how the Clinton finances, the Clinton Foundation, and the Clintons' ambitions often intersect. Few stories have generated more controversy than the reports the Clintons facilitated a deal to give Russia control of American uranium. The reporters themselves have actually been assailed, including Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter Jo Becker, who we have interviewed several times on her work. Becker has stood by her story amid withering criticism from the Clinton campaign.
Foreigners cannot donate to a presidential campaign. That's meant to limit the influence of foreign governments and foreigners on our political process. But they can legally donate to charitable foundations like the Clinton Foundation.
Billionaire businessman Frank Giustra, a Canadian, is a friend of the Clintons and a large donor to their foundation. And he had an interest in uranium mines located in Kazakhstan.
Bill Clinton has a public press conference with President Baier where he praises his rule and praises his human rights record. But the bottom line is, after they leave, a couple of days later, Frank Giustra gets his uranium concessions, which end up being enormously lucrative to him and to a small group of Canadian mining investors.
His company was like a bit player and really had gone from a worthless shell company overnight, got this huge uranium mining deal. And then soon after that, Bill Clinton got a huge donation, $31 million from Frank Giustra to his charitable foundation, followed by a pledge to donate $100 million more.
So what happened to Giustra's company that benefited from that deal in Kazakhstan?
What happened was Mr. Giustra's company merged with another company called Uranium One, and that was in 2007. Mr. Giustra told us that he, at that point, sold his shares and got out of the business. And the new company, of course, has the Kazakhstan assets that Mr. Giustra acquired, and it also starts to go on a buying spree in the United States.
And then the Russians bought it.
They would acquire would amount to 50% of projected uranium output by 2015.
In other words, Russia took control of what was projected to be up to half of America's uranium. Now, does Secretary Clinton factor into this?
For that deal to go through, it needs federal government approval, and one of those people that has to approve that deal is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton,
who, as Senator Clinton, was vigorously opposed to these kind of buys from countries into U.S. property.
That's a great point, Bret. You remember the Dubai ports deal, for example, which he was opposed to.
We believe that no foreign government should control our ports.
In this particular case, we're talking about uranium. We're talking about things that relate to the nuclear industry. We're talking about the Russian government,
which already provides equipment, material to Iran.
That's correct.
It took Schweitzer some digging to figure out how deeply those uranium interests were invested in the Clintons. So let's go to the Fernwood document.
Well, Fernwood Foundation is an entity in Canada controlled by Ian Telfer, who ends up being the chairman of Uranium One, which is the Russian-owned uranium company. Ian Telfer, in 2007, made an individual contribution to the Clinton Foundation. They did disclose that. The problem is, based on Canadian tax records, in this particular case, made a payment of $250,000 to the Clinton-Giustra Sustainable Growth Initiative. They are required to disclose the donation. They failed to do that. This is a hidden contribution. And over the course of a couple of years, you're talking about more than $2 million from the Fernwood Foundation to the Clinton Foundation. When you actually go to the Clinton Foundation website itself on disclosures and type in Fernwood, you find no contributions listed whatsoever.
When Mrs. Clinton became Secretary of State, she signed a memorandum of understanding with the Obama White House because they understood that having a Secretary of State whose husband is collecting money from various foreign interests could potentially pose conflicts of interest. And so they laid down certain rules. They said you can't take money from a foreign government. And they also required that the Clintons make all of their donors to their family foundation public. And contrary to the agreement that they had with the White House, those donations were never made public.
Ian Telfer told the New York Times that he made the donations based on his wish to personally support Mr. Giustra in his charitable work, not based on any relationship to the Clintons. He also said that he never spoke to either President Clinton or then Secretary Clinton about his company, Uranium One. Frank Giustra has said, quote, "The New York Times story presents no evidence of wrongdoing or impropriety, but rather is replete with innuendo and irresponsible, unfounded speculation." The Clinton campaign had this to say about both Schweitzer and the New York Times reporting. Clinton campaign spokesman Brian Fallon said, quote, "Hillary Clinton herself did not participate in the review or direct the department to take any position on the sale of Uranium One."
The campaign said typically these kinds of decisions don't go all the way up to the secretary and instead are decided at the assistant secretary level. And they produced an assistant secretary to say that she had never intervened on any case that he was involved in. But what they didn't say or couldn't answer is, was she briefed? Before this decision was made? They didn't say.
Fallon also says, quote, "Without presenting any direct evidence in support of the claim, the Times story, like the book on which it is based, wrongly suggests that Hillary Clinton's State Department pushed for the sale's approval to reward donors who had a financial interest in the deal."
Our story doesn't say that. Our story is about how some of the biggest donors to Bill Clinton's foundation built, financed, and eventually sold off to the Russians a company that held huge stakes in Kazakhstan and known American uranium reserves. While she was Secretary of State, the chairman of that company made undisclosed donations during that same time frame. She was part of a process that reviews deals like this, where you have a strategic asset and implications for national security.
Becker also takes issue with the Clinton campaign implying her reporting had anything to do with Peter Schweitzer, who you also heard in that segment. To the contrary, Becker says the Times did its own investigating and interviews for its report.